Under the pitch-black sky of the night of June 9, 1912, in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, home to just over 2,000 souls, a creeping horror silently slithered through its quiet streets. The Moore family, Josiah, the stern father, Sarah, the gentle for the doorknob, but it was locked tight. Overcome with worry, Mary let the Moore family's chickens out of their coop before hurrying to call Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Ross arrived, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. He banged on the door, shouting their names, but only the hollow echo of silence responded. Every curtain was drawn shut, as if the house itself was hiding a terrible secret. With trembling hands, Ross took out the spare key and slid it into the lock. The door creaked open, and a sickening stench hit him like a wave. Stepping inside, the dim morning light fell upon a horrifying sight in the parlor: two lifeless bodies, covered by blood-soaked sheets, the headboard smeared with dark red stains. Gasping for breath, Ross stumbled back, his hands shaking as he rushed to the hardware store where Josiah worked, grabbing the telephone and shouting into the receiver, "Call the sheriff. Something terrible has happened." At 8:30 a.m., Hank Horton, the town's sheriff, stepped into the house. What he witnessed was not just a crime, it was a living nightmare. 8 lives had been erased in silence, under the blade of an unknown killer's axe. A cold wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, carrying the whispers of death, warning that this horrific story had only just begun. When Sheriff Hank Horton stepped through the threshold of the Moore house, the thick stench of death hit him like a warning from hell. The dim light filtered through the tightly drawn curtains, illuminating the scene: not a home, but a blood-soaked tomb, where 8 souls had been ripped from life in eerie silence. On the kitchen table, a plate of cold food sat abandoned beside a basin filled with crimson-stained water, as if the killer had leisurely stayed behind, indulging in a meal amidst the carnage he had created. Every mirror in the house, even the glass on the doors, was covered with pieces of the Moore's clothing rummaged through and draped over them, as if to hide the murderer's guilty reflection, or to shield him from the madness in his own face. The axe, the instrument of the nightmare, rested against the wall in the parlor, its cold steel wiped down hastily, yet still stained with dried blood. Beside it lay a 4-pound slab of bacon, carefully wrapped in a cloth, a grotesque offering left behind by the killer. In the Moore family's 2 bedrooms, the ceilings were scarred with deep gashes from the axe, not from the attacks, but as if the murderer, lost in a frenzy, had swung it wildly in a dance of death, sending flakes of plaster drifting down onto the blood-soaked beds below. Sarah Moore, the gentle mother, was the only victim struck with the sharp edge of the axe, her face so brutally destroyed that she was unrecognizable. The other 7 had their skulls crushed by the blunt end, each blow carrying an unfathomable rage. In the parlor, the sight before Hank Horton made his blood run cold. Lena Stillinger, the 12-year-old girl, lay sprawled across the bed, part of her body slipping off the edge, her nightgown pulled up past her waist, her undergarments discarded on the floor. Blood and brain matter stained her pillow, and an unusual smear of blood on her left thigh just above the knee sent a chill down the spine. Had she awakened, struggling in her final moments? Or had the killer pulled her down to fulfill some unspeakable desire? Her younger sister, Ina, lay on her side, her hips twisted unnaturally, her body positioned toward a toppled lamp, her posture so unsettling it seemed orchestrated by the devil's own hand. But doctors confirmed, there were no signs of sexual assault. As for the 4 more children, they seemed to have drifted into eternal sleep without a scream, without a struggle, each tiny head crushed beneath the weight of merciless blows. Hank stepped outside, his legs heavy as stone, and whispered to Ross Moore, "Dear God, Ross, there's a body in every bed." He rushed back to town to summon a doctor, but in a fatal mistake, he let slip a few words to the townsfolk. The news spread like wildfire through the telegraph system of the time, and within moments, over 100 curious onlookers swarmed the Moore house. They screamed, ran through the rooms, trampled the floors, touched everything, a frenzied mob turning the crime scene into a grotesque circus, obliterating any fragile clues that might have led to the killer. Hank tried to drive them away, but as he forced people out the front door, more flooded in through the back. Amidst the chaos, a chilling detail surfaced: 2 half-smoked cigarettes were found in the attic. The murderer had likely crouched in that suffocating darkness, patiently waiting, smoking, listening as the Moore family drifted into slumber before descending, axe in hand, to begin his slaughter. No one had heard a single sound that night. Some whispered that the killer had drugged the family's food, leaving them in a sleep so deep they never stirred. Others believed that the first axe swings were too swift, too precise, extinguishing life in an instant before he returned to the parents' bedroom, hacking at them over and over, as if trying to erase every trace of their existence. And the slab of bacon? Some theorized he had planned to take it as a twisted trophy. But a more disturbing thought sent shivers down the spine, that he had used it as a perverse object, placing it near the Stillinger sisters' bodies to satisfy his own depraved madness, though no evidence ever confirmed this. The darkness inside the Moore house had not only swallowed 8 lives but had left behind chilling questions, traces of a demon that never showed its face. After that horrifying night, Villisca was no longer the peaceful town of friendly smiles. An invisible curse had taken root, sowing fear and suspicion into every street, every home. The nightmare didn't end when the sun rose, it had only just begun. A parade of names surfaced, suspects with shadowy pasts and murky motives, yet no one could be definitively tied to the blood-stained axe. More than a century has passed, but the murderer still lingers, perhaps in memory, in the dark corners of the attic, or beneath the creaking floorboards of the Moore house, like a ghost that refuses to rest. First was Frank Jones, an Iowa state senator, a powerful man with cold eyes and a simmering hatred. Josiah Moore had once worked for him, but when Josiah left to start his own business, their friendship curdled into enmity. The 2 men avoided each other on the streets, their glances sharp as daggers. Rumors swirled, never proven, that Josiah had an affair with Frank's daughter-in-law, fueling the fire of resentment. A chilling theory emerged: Frank, with his wealth and influence, had hired William Blackie Mansfield, a known axe murderer, to wipe out the Moore family. Mansfield, whose hands were already stained with blood, had been suspected of slaughtering his own family in Kansas, his wife, young child, in-laws, all found with their skulls crushed, their faces covered, the axe wiped clean, a lamp overturned on the floor. But in Villisca, Mansfield had an alibi: he had been in Illinois that night. Later, he sued the detective who accused him, pocketed $2,225, and vanished into the shadows. Then came Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims, a man who had butchered his mother and grandmother with an axe in Missouri, hundreds of miles away. He was sentenced to life in prison, and federal investigators believed he could be the demon behind 22 axe murders across America, including Villisca. Yet the evidence against him was fragile as smoke, dissolving in the courtroom. Andy Sawyer, a drifter working on the railroads, also sent chills down people's spines. He slept with an axe beside him every night, devoured newspapers about the crime with an eerie obsession, and even bragged to co-workers that he had been in Villisca that night, fleeing town only because he feared being suspected. But when arrested, records proved he had been jailed in Osceola, Iowa, for vagrancy at the time of the murders. His confession evaporated into thin air. Finally, the strangest figure of all emerged: Reverend George Kelly, a deranged preacher from England with a twisted smile and vacant eyes. Arrested for sending obscene letters, a known peeping Tom, he had been at the church on the night of the Moore family's attendance at Children's Day. At 5:19 a.m., Kelly boarded a train leaving Villisca, but upon hearing of the murders, he became fixated, writing letters asking for details, even visiting the crime scene with investigators. Detective Tom O'Leary lured him into a trap with a letter, and Kelly responded with a bizarre story. He had heard the axe swinging as he walked past the Moore house, had seen the killer step onto the porch, hiding as a passing couple unknowingly brushed by, and had watched Sarah Moore sit up just before the fatal strike. On the train that morning, before the crime was discovered, he had already spoken about it, a detail that sent a shudder through all who heard it. In 1917, Kelly was arrested and interrogated by three towering men: a lawyer, a sheriff, and an investigator. Under their pressure, he screamed that God had commanded him, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," only to immediately retract his confession. 2 trials followed, but with his frail frame, standing at 5 feet 2 inches and weighing only 119 pounds, and his shattered mind, the jury refused to believe he had the strength to commit such a brutal crime. A bruise on his cheek during the trial further fueled suspicions that he had been coerced. Kelly was set free, and many continued to believe Frank Jones had orchestrated everything, using the mad preacher as a puppet. The investigation stretched on for years, but the truth faded into darkness. The people of Villisca lived in terror. Guns and locks sold out within days after the murders. Paranoia grew, rumors spread, but justice never came. The killer, hands drenched in the blood of 8 souls, had taken his secret to the grave, or perhaps he still lingers somewhere in that house, mocking those who seek the truth. More than 100 years later, the Villisca Axe Murders remain an open wound in Iowa's history, an unsolved riddle, a place where innocent spirits remain trapped between nightmare and the eternal silence of the dark.